Hello, Amy. Welcome to the channel.
Well, hello. Happy to be here.
So, Amy is the state archaeologist for Wisconsin, and Wisconsin has been in the news lately for an amazing discovery, or I should actually say multiple discoveries. It seems as though you and your team have discovered a parking lot of canoes in Lake Mendota near Madison, Wisconsin. And these canoes are now underwater, and you were able to sample them. They date between 700 to 5,200 years before present. I didn't even realize wooden canoes could last that long. So could you please tell us about the discovery of the parking lot of canoes in Lake Mendota?
Well, it didn't start out as a discovery of a parking lot. It started out as the discovery of a single canoe in 2021 when our diver, Tara Thompson, was killing some time during COVID, picking up trash on the lake bottom with a dive partner and stopped and happened to have stopped directly over the exposed end of the first dugout canoe, dugout number 1. She knew what she was looking at. She had been working with a grad student named Ryan Smobel with the University of Wisconsin-Madison partner organization, and didn't expect, however, that she would find one on just a lovely Saturday in the lake.
And that was the initial discovery.
That was the initial discovery. She contacted me by phone, said that she'd found something in the lake, and wanted to know if I would come out on the boat with her. And it was a gorgeous Saturday. Yeah, sure, I'll come in. She said, interesting thing. She said, I'm pretty sure it's a dugout canoe, but there are these weird rocks in it. And I'm not sure what I'm looking at here. So I came out. She brought some of the stones up after photographing them in place, of course. And we looked them over. Some had obviously been worked by human hands. Others were just stones, but they should not have been where they were. They were not rounded. They were flat. They had chips and notches in them. And so I asked her to put them back. And then that night we mulled it over and realized that they were net weights. They were sinkers used to hold down the bottom of a drift net. And it sat there for a while. We were in between state archaeologists at that time. And a few months later, when James Skibo, our next state archaeologist, came in, he says, "There anything interesting I should know about?" We said, "Sure. There's this canoe in Lake Mendota." I said, "How old is it?" "Oh, we don't know. I mean, we're a state agency. We don't get money for radiocarbon dates." But Jim was a very persuasive individual, and he managed to get us what we needed for the date. We thought if we were lucky, it would be maybe 300 years old. And when the results came back and we had a 1,200-year-old canoe, you could have scraped us off the floor.
That's amazing. And how big is this canoe? Can you describe the dimensions?
About 15 feet long, just about a foot or a little over wide. It's not a wide canoe. It's not a deep canoe. It's very shallow. It's almost like a stand-up paddleboard with a little bit of hold in it. You could sit on it and hang your feet off of either side pretty easily. It's got rounded ends. It's obviously been burned. Of course, it's how dugout canoes were made. It's one of the reasons she was able to identify it. It had been shaped by tools. It's, I'd say, about yay thick on the sides. Just a lovely creation. And we never expected that there would be wood in the lake that would survive that long.
That's what's blowing me away right now. And in some ways I shouldn't be surprised because I've dated wood stumps in lakes to try to determine when lake level changes happen. And some of those the stumps from trees, I should say, they can be a few centuries old in shallow water. And so, but I just felt like canoes would be so fragile that they wouldn't survive.
Yeah, the first one is in decent shape. One end has degraded. It was the end that was exposed when she found it. Surprisingly in good condition. You reach out and touch it. There's a little softness to the wood, but not overly much. You know, when we found it, the next question we had was, will it survive that way? You know, should it come out of the lake and stay in the lake? And at that point, this is the oldest watercraft that had been found in Wisconsin. You know, we joked that Tammy just found the oldest shipwreck in our waters here. Because we just had the one at that point. There was a hole in one end. Thought it was maybe it had gone down in a storm or just gotten loose from where it was being kept. It didn't appear to have been intentionally buried. At least we didn't see any indication of that. All right, we've just got this one off, just one canoe. Contacts were made. Jim Skibo arranged to have the Ho-Chunk here, to have a dive team to assist, and it was raised from the lake then. at the end of that summer in 21 and taken to a conservation tank to keep it from degrading further. And it sat there for about a year because this is COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And we were waiting for a preservative called PEG, polyethylene glycol, that needs to be added to the wood to maintain it. Turns out that's a component of vaccines.
Mm.
So the world supply was being otherwise occupied. So it
Used.
sat in the tank in some nice clean water for a while while we visited. And it turns out that was a good thing because the next year Tammy went diving again.
And found some more.
A second canoe. Same thing. She announced what she found. We asked for a sample. She brought it up. And of course, we expected this will be the same age as the first canoe. It's got to be 1,200 years old. Oh, 3,000.
3,000. Oh my gosh.
We
And
are
how deep?
closer in. How deep?
How
They're about 24 feet of water.
24 feet. And do you know much about the limnology of the water? Is it anoxic water down there, or is it oxygenated?
It's
Yeah,
oxygenated. Yes,
it's
it's
oxygenated at the bottom. Okay.
just that they are being exposed. So there is erosion now that is occurring at that particular location that is beginning to bring the canoes to light. First the one, then the second one. As we cleared the water from around the second one, she found a third nearby. Radiocarbon date on that came out at 2,000. Then digging underneath it to raise the second canoe, there was another one underneath it that was considerably older, even than that one. And that's the point at which we realized this is not just a shipwreck or one canoe or two canoes, that this is a site with multiple canoes in various stages of preservation. By this point, of course, we're talking to Native nations, to the Ho-Chunk, to Anishinaabe groups, to Menominee, and the decision was made at that point after the second canoe came up, we would leave all the rest in place.
In other words, that's when you realized you found a parking lot of canoes.
At all different ages.
At all different ages.
All the different ages. We thought at that time that their location must mean that there is a village out there. They are a few hundred feet offshore and steep, however, 24 feet of water, and that didn't make any sense for a village. We know there are sites of the right ages on shore. There are burial mounds that are contemporary with the first canoe, the 1,200-year-old canoe on shore. So that made sense, but their distance and their depth did not to us. We talked, Lake Mendota is called the most studied lake in the world because it's literally right next to our limnology department. They front the lake. They have research vessels there. And we checked the pollen course they had taken. We talked with faculty and quickly realized that what we're looking at is an old shoreline. There's a submerged shoreline in the lake and probably all the lakes in the Madison area dating to peak temperature and drought here, which is about 7,000 to 3,000 years back. So our next theory is there must be a village out that is now submerged under the lake water. So our next investigations were based on that premise. Let's go looking for it. So our Jim Skibo, again, our state archaeologist, time learned how to dive. He went down looking, helped actually find another canoe himself.
Nice.
On one of his first dives out there, and then went looking for the village. Nothing yet. I'm not saying there's not one down there, but nothing yet.
Now, these dates stretch back 5,200 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that world is a much different world than the world 1,000 years ago, because we have hunter-gatherers all the way to agricultural people. Do you notice any stylistic differences in the earlier canoes versus later?
No. They seem to have found the ideal technology for this lake and stayed there. You use like a spoon. A spoon is a spoon. If you change a spoon too much, it's not a good spoon anymore. But they've got 15 feet is about the right length. That's about the right size. And they kind of stayed with that.
Any evidence for birch bark canoes?
Not that we found it at this site. Birch bark is fragile enough. I don't think it would preserve if it was here. But I don't know that you would necessarily need birch bark or want it on this lake. Bill Quackenbush, the Ho-Chunk Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, he has paddled a dugout of his own creation on the lake. Lake Mendota is a decent-sized lake. It gets some good waves on it, when the wind is up and the storms are coming in. A birch bark would not handle well under those conditions. It would get tossed around a fair amount in the wind and the waves. But the dugouts just plow right through the waves. You're not going to sink it, even if it fills up with water. And he has filled up his own and paddled it around too. It's a little wet, but you're still going to stay on top of the lake surface and not go down. and it doesn't really care about that big water.
Whoa. I didn't realize that about the dugouts, that they're pretty much buoyant because of the wood rather than the
Mhm.
displacement of the volume.
When we brought up the first canoe, and again, one of the theories was that that little hole in one end may have been what caused it to go down. But when we moved it into its conservation tank and settled it in, it floated.
Oh
It's
my
1,200 years old, and it was still floating. We had to physically push it down and sink it to get it back under the water to be conserved.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wow. And then they're all composed of, or are they made of oak, or what kind of wood are they composed?
A variety of woods. The oldest ones are either red oak or elm. Then there's a period around 2,000 years ago where there's a little bit experimentation in wood type. You see some ash, you see some basswood, some undetermined species. And then as you get up closer to the current period, so around the era of canoe number one, they change over to white oak.
Okay. And describe how you're dating these. Or is it a combination of tree rings, or is it radiocarbon, or are you
It's radiocarbon. So
okay?
we're making every attempt to take the wood from the outermost portions of the canoe, away from the heartwood. Of course, the inner rings of the tree would date too old. We're wanting the rings as close to the date the tree was felled as we can get without the wood being too degraded. So we understand that the dates aren't going to be exactly the year they were cut down. They're going to be a little bit before, but you have a range with radiocarbon dates. There's always that little window of uncertainty.
Exactly. Like, you're never going to get down to a year or a 10-year window with radiocarbon, even with the best dates ever, because even the best windows of uncertainty are like 50 years or
Yeah.
something.
And we are working with, again, researchers at the University of Wisconsin to see if in future we can use dendrochronology for these. The problem is we don't have any comparatives. We've got no trees in Wisconsin old enough that we could take the tree ring record back that far and compare them to.
Have you investigated much the paleoclimate story behind the low lake levels in that mid Holocene?
I mean, not in detail. We know that it was a fairly strong drought period here. Most of the regional lakes were down to water table. We know that the Yahara River, which feeds Lake Mendota and the chain of lakes in Madison, had probably shut off, that there were no connections in between the lakes at that point. You would have had to have walked from one to the other instead of paddling down the Yahara River like you would have before the lock and dam went in.
Okay.
What's intriguing us, however, is the fact that there are still canoes out there, even though the lakes should have returned to normal levels. So we expect the 5,200-year-old canoe to be out there, the 4,000-year-old canoe to be out there, even the 3,000-year-old canoe to be out there. But we have canoes that are 1,200 years old, 800 years old. By that point, the lake should have been up to their current level. And yet they're telling us that every so often we have drought strong enough in Wisconsin that it will drop the lakes back, that the Yahara River will turn off again.
Hmm.
So what we think of as a stable climate now may not be. I think they're giving us a little bit of a warning, given that we have a large capital city that's relying on this lake right now. I think it's one we ought to listen to.
Wow. What you're saying is consistent with other evidence I'm aware of. Elk Lake and Allison Smith's work. Elk Lake, Minnesota records this middle Holocene drought where the lake levels go down, but they recover, like you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I'm aware, by 1500 BP, and the lake levels I think would have been close to modern by that point. So that's a very interesting mystery, and it makes you wonder that maybe the isotopes aren't recording the lake level change, or and then also this is a slightly different part of the Midwest. Things vary across space too.
Yeah, I think that we just may be missing the fine grained detail. Like,
Hmm.
okay, the lakes are back up to normal, but we're missing that 5-year window here, that 10-year window there, that 1-year window there when they're not at that modern level and they've gone back down.
It would be strange to see a short, it goes short regression in lake levels, then they just seem to just leave a canoe there during that short window and then it returns. Seems
Well,
strange.
that's
Is
where
that
we
what you
get to
mean?
the parking lot.
Okay.
So when the lakes are cut off from one another, again, the only way to get from one to the other is to walk. And having lifted these canoes with the help of quite a few people, they're heavy. Even as old as they are now, they are heavy. No one is going to portage a water-soaked dugout canoe, a mile or two overland. So they're leaving them there. This is a park and ride. The canoes are showing up exactly where ravines cut down the slope and give people in the lake access to the overland trail system. So instead of climbing a deep, steep bluff, you're actually walking up a shallow ravine to the uplands, to the trail system, and then that takes you then to the next lake down in the chain.
I saw the map. I couldn't believe it. And it lines right up. You put the
Mm-hmm.
trails right there and then you see the little canoes sticking out in the water. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. And
Very
yeah,
much a case where every data point helped tell that story. 'Cause when one or two canoes were there, you couldn't tell the pattern. The more that have come up, the clearer that pattern has become.
in a way, I'm feeling like you have just cracked open and peered into Pandora's box because now what is Wisconsin known for geographically? And Minnesota, I guess.
Lots of lakes,
Lakes
lots
are
and lots of lakes.
everywhere. So if this is in Mendota, I
Mhm.
don't see why, if the conditions are the same and everything, there wouldn't be canoes in all the lakes or most of
Oh,
them or some of them.
I suspect that's exactly the case. So Tammy has been working and has been for quite a while, even before these discoveries in Lake Mendota. She's been working with Dr. Sissel Schroeder, University of Wisconsin-Madison, as my former advisor there, on the project that Ryan Smazel, the grad student I mentioned earlier, pioneered to look at dugout canoes in collections. So these are canoes that are in local museums, they're in tribal museums, they're in local historical societies, antique shops, hardware stores in one instance, resorts. None of them as old as the Lake Mendota canoes, of course,
Hmm.
because these are much more recent. But they are also now, as this word of their project has gotten out, starting to get reports of a canoe in a lake here, a canoe in a riverbank there, a canoe in a lake here. We already knew of canoes in Lake Mary in Kenosha County and Lake Geneva, just southeast of Madison. One had been recovered from Lake Wingrove, which is a small lake in the Madison chain before. So I think, yeah, we're starting just to touch that. And eventually maybe Wisconsin will become the land of 10,000 canoes,
10,000 ancient canoes.
ancient canoes.
Saw those other canoes that have been recovered and dated. They are much younger, which makes
Mhm,
more sense to me. When I
mhm,
saw the press release, I think yesterday or
mhm,
2 days ago when I
mhm.
emailed you, I couldn't believe I saw the 5,000-year-old date. That's truly so remarkable. Yeah.
This site just keeps knocking us back. Every time we think we've hit what it can tell us, the most amazing thing it can tell us, it gives us something else.
Do you find any other artifacts with these canoes, like ceramics?
No ceramics, no nets, no fish hooks, no harpoons. We've definitely been looking. So far, all we have found are the stone net sinkers, a set of 7 from the first canoe, and then most recently, 3 more were found with another of the older canoes. Again, thousands of years apart, but the same technology. These are not formal artifacts. You see these beautifully polished plummets with grooves and notches in
Hmm.
them. These are flat stones that somebody has picked up off a beach out of the glacial till, and if it already works to hold a cord, they're leaving them as is. If it doesn't, they'll nap it just as much as they need to get a cord to hold and then move on. These are very expedient tools. And, it's just as I'm wondering now how many canoes are in our lakes. I've got to wonder how many of these little net sinkers are
Hmm.
scattered all over the place. There's so many of them, again, are just stones. How
Hmm.
many times has an archaeologist or a visitor to a park or a diver or a swimmer stepped on one or walked over one and never noticed what was beneath their feet?
You said there's no hooks there, but have you found evidence for any copper artifacts of any types?
At the site, no, it really is barren of artifacts other than the sinkers and the canoes themselves. Of course, we're keeping an eye on them.
Hmm.
Copper use is known, as you're well aware, in Wisconsin, dating far, far back in time, but
Hmm.
long before even the first of our canoes, oldest of our canoes was made. So certainly we should find some copper at some point. When we were excavating the first one, I was asking people in particular, please look for copperfish hooks, because
Hmm.
that we do have a potential to find. Nothing yet.
Have they searched with metal detectors?
We have not used metal detectors. The first canoe came up with actually, we used a dredge. Tammy had a friend who had a little piece of machinery used for gold mining up in Alaska. It was not the best piece of equipment. It sprung leaks quite frequently, and at one point almost set our boat on fire. But it did work, and we've used it to sort of vacuum the sediment up from around that first canoe and bring it up. Again, looking for anything. Nothing.
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 I would be very interested to hear the results if and when you use I believe they have underwater metal detectors you could probably use.
That's down the road.
That's
Yes,
down the road, your
that's
plan.
down the road.
Oh, I'm so glad. That's kind of the That's the main reason I wanted to talk to you today because of I wanted to see if you found some copper stuff because I
Not yet.
saw
I'm
the
not going
net
to say we won't.
weights. Okay, that's amazing. And I think copper was used for fishing. It was a very important fishing technology for the indigenous people. And I think a lot of it is lost in the lakes because a lot of it is hook
Yeah.
material, things used in everyday life. I know a lot of copper stuff is found along shorelines of lakes as well, but I think under the water, there's going to be a lot. I don't see why not. And if there's also low oxygen conditions coupled with copper, then I
Mhm.
think you'll have the preservation of organic matter with that copper, maybe like the strings attached to the hooks
That
and
would be the hope, to get some of the netting, to get some of the
or netting or
cordage, to
something.
get some wood shafts for harpoons.
And okay, now when we first got on today, you mentioned that you are aware of the work I've done on the old copper complex in Lake Superior, and the interests I have there tie into this canoe subject because many of the study sites, I should say, many of the copper mines are found on islands
Mhm.
or a big island known as Isle Royale National Park. And as far as I'm aware, we know very little about the boating technology that was used to get there and transport the copper from the sites.
Nice.
Historically, birch bark canoes were used on the lake, and I'm sure dugouts were around as well, but we just don't know very much about it. Our hopes is that we could find maybe a canoe on Isle Royale because there are portages that are vital to getting from the north to south side of the island. Because if you don't use the portage, you have to paddle like quite a ways
Mhm.
around either side.
Mhm.
But this chain of lakes connects the north and south side of the island. And I feel as though that would be a great place to find canoes and to figure out, help us determine more about the copper mining that happened up on Lake Superior. But yeah, I was any thoughts on like where you would look or suggestions on techniques for that study?
Where the trails, where the overland routes would be is where I would look, and hope that you have, again, the right kind of geologic and sedimentary conditions to preserve. 'Cause you're lucky in Mendota that the canoes are in somewhat of a sheltered shore. There is, again, sediment coming down those ravines that's helping to bury them. You're going to need something like that at IOL. You're also going to hope that they had extra canoes, because it's one thing to abandon a canoe in Lake Mendota. It's another to abandon one in Lake Superior when you're stuck on an island. So
Hmm.
you're going to have one way to get home.
That's a good point. And our feeling is that I think those inland lakes, it wouldn't make sense to take your wet Superior canoe when you're going up inland into the island. So maybe you would construct some up there to leave there. And how much sediment were these buried under in Mendota?
Not too much. I mean, just she was able to get the first one, but again, they're coming out because
They're
there's erosion
coming
at the
out.
site. We have canoes under canoes. So I have a feeling that as the erosion continues, we're going to find that these go somewhat deep.
That's a lot of sediment for that many. I mean, and that you think is critical because you can tell the parts of the canoe that are exposed versus the parts that are buried, or the
Yep.
parts that are buried are better preserved.
Considerably better reserve.
Hmm.
The oldest ones, too, I don't think would have lasted long without significant burial. By the time you get to 4,000 years back, the wood's barely wood anymore. It's like touching wet wood. Another reason that they are going to remain where they are is that they're too fragile.
So I was gonna ask, and I think you kind of already answered it,
Mhm.
unfortunately, but I do want to talk about like the history, the evolution of watercraft in Wisconsin and the Midwest in indigenous times. And from what I'm gathering here at Mendota, it stayed pretty stable what they had
Extremely.
used from archaic times to the woodland,
I suspect right up to European contact.
right up to European continent. Yeah.
They have theory, and Sister Schroeder and Tammy are working on this aspect in their own study. When you get into the post-contact period, dugout canoe types do tend to shift and change at that point. They begin to look like birch bark canoes, and
Hmm.
I am honestly wondering if population movement 1650 and after, as you have Anishinaabe and Eastern populations coming in, and then French voyageurs, they're relying on birch bark technology. I wonder if the idea, the mental template of a canoe begins to shift at that point. Birch bark canoes are canoes. Canoes should look like that. And
Mm.
the old tradition of just making this nice, sturdy dugout that will plow through the waves kind of falls by the wayside as people begin to give them a birch bark appearance.
What advantage would a birch bark canoe have over the dugout and vice versa?
Portaging for sure. So I've been
Portaging.
in the room when Bill Quackenbush at Ho-Chunk and Marvin Defoe and Larry Pazinski, they're both Ojibwe. Marvin is a birch bark canoe maker. And to have them both in the room is fun because they're both, oh, birch bark's better, dugouts are better, birch bark's are better, dugouts are better. And, it seems to be what you want it to do. If you're portaging and hauling, you want a birch bark. They're nice and light. You can repair them fairly easily. But if you're going to be on big water where there's concern of the canoe overturning or filling, you want a dugout.
The concern the person had with the birch bark on Mendota being unstable in the wind. I mean, I feel like out in Lake Superior that would have been amplified multiple times. And then I'm only aware of the historical accounts. They use birch bark canoes. And so that makes sense now that they were worried about portaging.
Mhm.
And that has implications for Isle Royal then, because if they're using birch bark there, then they would have portaged their canoes out of there.
Yeah. Much less likely to preserve as well, unless you get exactly the right conditions. So I
Mhm.
think that it's a much more fragile watercraft.
And then stable boating technology for thousands of years up there. I mean, it must have been such an important means of travel because of the lakes, and the Great Lakes are like an inland freshwater seaway.
Mhm.
And I feel like we would have seen a lot more evolution in the boats, and maybe sailing technology. Is there any evidence for sails being used?
Not direct. Again, this is something that Sissel and Tammy are looking at in their samples. They are seeing some indications possibly of footings that may have been holding small mass. There is a shell engraving from spiral mounts that shows a canoe with what appears to be a standard or a flag or possibly even a sail attached. So I wouldn't doubt that technology was in use someplace. Dugout canoes, not just in Wisconsin, but across the mid-continent, are all very, very similar. Length varies, depth of hole varies. If you look at larger samples, we know that these canoes are being used to go out to the Great Plains. You have trade networks on the rivers that extend from Yellowstone into Wisconsin. We find obsidian from that area here. From Wisconsin, from the portage between the Fox and Wisconsin rivers, you can connect the Mississippi, Missouri system to the North Atlantic. So we're sitting astride a major trade and travel route that can go from the Rocky Mountains to the East Coast and then down to the Gulf area. That's all being done by canoe. And I would suspect most of it is dugout.
Do you have any plans to try and use remote sensing to detect more canoes?
Oh, we are well underway in that. So Bill Quackenbush, as I mentioned with the Ho-Chunk, he has a ground penetrating radar unit. And before Jim passed a couple of years ago, he convinced us all, including my southern scared self, to go out onto this lake ice in the middle of winter with the ground penetrating radar unit. And we ran it up above the canoe location. Bill took the results home. He came back later in a very rainy day before the ice broke up, did it again. Got some kind of equivocal results there. He was seeing some shadowing. And then we thought, we'll do it again. Jim Skibo passed. Unfortunately, he had a heart attack on the lake next to the canoe site. And that kind of put us off our game for a little while, of course. And then Lake Mendota refused to cooperate the next year. It never really formed ice thick enough to keep going. By chance, Tammy and I were at a Society for American Archaeology conference in New Orleans and had just seen a paper on ground penetrating radar studies done on a stand-up paddleboard. And I was on the phone with Bill, and he said I had the best idea. I told him about the paper. So he got his modern dugout canoe, the one he's been using for journeys and experimentation. We put the ground penetrating radar unit in the new canoe to look for old canoes. So it worked very nicely as a platform for radar into the lake. And we're still waiting on some of the results because this is kind of new, working out on through ice and through water. So the makers of the unit are actually working with Bill to try and interpret some of the results. So we have some promising indications. Something else may be done.
That would be a nice way to find sites, if
Yes.
wait till the lakes to freeze over, find some good trail sites where you think they're going to be portaging, easily survey. And yeah, technology is nice.
Yes. Yes, it is.
The LiDAR has been very useful. out on Isle Royal for finding some prehistoric mining remains and actually helped to identify what we're calling a new prehistoric mining district on Isle Royal that's very long and totally undiscovered until I think, just a few years ago, all because of LIDAR.
Yeah. It has saved us from crawling through thorny thickets looking for burial mounds here so many times.
Well, the burial mounds. You have a ton of burial mounds in Wisconsin. It's
Thousands.
a bunch of the animal effigies, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we are the epicenter of effigy mound construction, and it is wonderful when you're looking through LiDAR imagery to suddenly see a string of bears or birds staring back at you
And you're still finding them today?
all the time, all the time.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I did a little bit of LiDAR work in Kansas. And when I was at Kansas State University, I went to a talk and they had mentioned they buried people on these hills in the prairie,
Mm-hmm.
the tall grass prairie, and they're little mounds. And a few of them were excavated. And I just looked on LiDAR. I'm like, oh, I could easily find that one. And so then I started looking at all the prominent hill sites near where I was living, and all of them had mounds, and very few were documented even by the state.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I had a student go through, check with the state archaeologist, and we submitted a few new mound sites. One of them was this unbelievable burial mound near Alma, Kansas, or Alma, as they would say there. And it was on this like terrace of limestone that just went up like steps, step. And at the top of it's almost like a square or like a triangle. And then this beautiful mound. And I went out there with the rancher and he's like, we always knew that was something. I'm like, this is totally undisturbed. Most of them had been pillaged, but we had found a bunch of mounds that had at least no evidence from digging on the surface, because you could see on the LiDAR excavations of these pits, of these mounds, I should say. LiDAR is going to change the game, and I'm trying to get more people doing LiDAR research on here, especially the stuff that they're doing in the Amazon and Central America with those huge cities in the jungle. And I've got Stefan Rothstein on here, who did this big site in the Amazon. It was like the earliest evidence of urbanism. It was a paper in Science recently, and they found like a city in it would think Ecuador up in the mountains, and it's mid Holocene and just absolutely enormous with like water catchments and modified cisterns and things like that. Cool. I think, cover everything I wanted to know. Really wanted to hear about the copper and seeing if you were considering that and remote sensing these. I wanted to get some of your tips and thoughts on maybe finding prehistoric canoes in other sites.
Look for those overland trail systems.
Those overland
that's
trails.
going to be the key.
And then whether or not they use birch bark or dugout is critical, because the birch bark is essentially a portaging canoe. Wow, so they're so much lighter. I mean, but they're susceptible to being blown in the wind.
If they're light, if they're not heavily laden, they'll as Bill puts it, I don't want to be tossed all over the lake.
And then how much time does it take to make the birch bark versus the dugout?
That I don't really have a good handle on. I know Marvin Defoe, who was a Red Book band, worked on a birch bark to restore one for the Wisconsin Historical Society for one of our historic sites this summer. And he did it, over the course of a summer, was in public, also demonstrating to tourists what he was doing, which I'm sure slowed him down considerably. For a dugout, it's not just the time taking to make it, it's the time that goes into selecting the tree, possibly even preparing the tree. Is what we're seeing in the oldest trees in the Lake Mendota site is they are quite unusual. These may be deliberate selections, if not direct arboriculture 5,000 years back. There's maybe hearing that some of these canoes are being made of red oak, and that doesn't make any sense. Red oak is an extremely porous wood. It's not something you would want for a watercraft that needs to be fairly watertight. Our wood has what are called tyloses. This are sort of waxy blockages in the pores in the wood. And this is something you don't normally see in red oak. It's common in white oak. And again, many of our youngest canoes are white oak, but you shouldn't see it in red oak. And the theory that's currently being investigated by Schroeder and Tenda Thompson are that these trees are deliberately being wounded and stressed in order to induce them to form these tidal oases, almost like an immune response. People may be 10 years, 5 years back already selecting the canoes they want, when they're still in tree form, and managing the wood in order to get what they need for that canoe down the line.
That's amazing.
It's new stuff.
But I'm picturing, you're seeing the tree you want to do,
Mhm.
you want to use for the canoe, and you maybe cut the bark off the outside so it scars itself and fills it in with like
Scars it,
sap.
wound it, infect it with fungus or some sort of pathogen. You see the shape, see the wood, and you realize, oh yeah, but that's red oak. But then you realize, yes, but I can make that red oak the kind of wood we need, and go at it however that's being done.
And that would suggest the canoe planning was a multi-year,
Mhm.
multi-decadal process. And they seem to have preserved these canoes by, you think, purposefully sinking them in the winter to keep them wet. And because I'd imagine you have a soaked log that freezes on the surface,
Yeah,
the
that's
water
not a good idea.
expands and then the whole thing dissolves. Yep. That's critical for this preservation story. And that was the piece I saw in your press release and
Mhm.
with your colleagues, that they believe they were intentionally sunk to preserve them
Yeah.
over the winter. And I'm like, bingo, that's going to be key to understanding this. And that makes total sense, because who would take a wooden boat out in Wisconsin winters and put it like upside down next to their tent, or, where they're living? They would never have done that. They would have kept it below the ice
Mhm.
level too. You would have to get it, the ice gets thick there. It could be either 3 or 4 feet thick.
And last thing you want is an ice push to grab a canoe and take it to the other side of the lake, because the wind breaks it up too. So you want it to be far enough down.
Hmm. Did they use those weights to hold the canoes underwater, you think?
We think they were just simply bearing. When she mentioned with the first canoe that she'd found rocks, it was actually my first thought, is she must be talking about pretty large cobbles and boulders in order to hold down a wooden canoe. And so I was surprised when she brought up the little thin net sinkers that she did. We found no evidence of large stones being used to weigh these down. We found no posts or pins, any wooden scaffolding that would be used to hold them down. We think they were just using the lake sediment itself.
Any evidence for like wax or pine tar glue being used to plug holes or anything like that?
No,
Wow. They're pretty simple, but obviously sturdy technology that they just found work.
it's extremely functional. We've gotten estimates that that first canoe could have held one person and a bunch of fish, or two people if they're not planning to carry much with them. Dangle your feet in the water if you don't mind getting a little wet. So what if there's a hole in one end?
And the person would have just stood in this canoe.
Could have stood, could have paddled. We haven't found any paddles yet, but if you're walking from one canoe to another, you're probably going to carry the paddle with you.
Mm-hmm.
We're not expecting to find much in the way of paddles.
That makes sense. That's one thing you might have carried or let dry out and set next to the lake,
Mhm.
and it took back. And wow, this is amazing. It's amazing the possibility that we can find boats from the middle Holocene and maybe earlier now, I think, from the Great Lakes region. This raises the possibility they're out there. I mean, we have one that's 5,200 years old now.
I'm pushing her. She every time she goes in the lake, I'm like, Tammy, find me that paleo boat.
Yeah.
It's down there.
Paleo Indian, imagine that. Or imagine
Mhm.
you find a canoe with some Clovis points right in there, just sitting in there, be like, this is too good to be true. Well, Amy, thank you for taking the time to talk with me. Should we be keeping an eye out for any papers or videos or content that you're going to be putting out with your colleagues?
Absolutely. I know Tammy and Sissel are working now on a science paper for their work, so that should be coming out soon. We are waiting for our canoes to come out of conservation. So they'll be coming out of their tanks in March, heading down to Texas for a brief sojourn in a vacuum freeze drying chainer down there. And once we get a look at the entire craft, because we haven't been able to look at the bottoms, we're going to start getting papers together on the site.
Sweet. I'm looking forward to seeing those. Okay. Well, thanks again for joining. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. If you did, please subscribe to my channel. It helps me so much, and it's free. Or you can like this video. Thank you again, Amy. Bye.
Thank you so much.